Within the walls of Roman forts, far from the battlefield, the legionaries faced another kind of struggle. Not against external enemies, but against time, fatigue, and relentless discipline. How did these men, who built the greatest empire in history, prepare for war while living in camps surrounded by civilians? You might think that a soldier's life was all about combat, but what if I told you that during the breaks between campaigns, these warriors maintained a rigorous routine of training, survival, and even interaction with local populations? Today, we're going to explore the daily life inside Roman forts, from the meals that sustained these men to the training that turned them into war machines. Get ready to discover how life within these strongholds shaped the soldiers who conquered the world. What follows will reveal what really happened behind the scenes of Roman power. Inside each Roman fort, the organization was a direct reflection of the efficiency and power of the empire. These fortifications were not just temporary military constructions. They represented the order and discipline of a well-oiled war machine. At the heart of the camp, known as the Praetorium, was the commander's residence, symbolizing a clear hierarchy. Beyond that, the streets of the fort followed a strict urban plan, dividing into barracks, supply depots, workshops, and training areas. Every corner had a well-defined purpose, creating a miniature version of the empire within its walls. The walls, made of wood, stone, or even bricks, served as the first line of defense, but the true protection came from strategy. Watchtowers were scattered along the perimeter, always monitored by sentinels on rigorously controlled shifts. It was not uncommon for large gates to lead to the outside world, controlling the entry and exit of troops and occasionally civilians trading with the soldiers. These forts were self-sufficient, functioning as independent cities with forges, bakeries, and public baths, all aimed at ensuring the legionaries could sustain long campaigns. Inside the walls, life was highly organized. The streets, designed in an orthogonal layout, allowed for efficient movement, and the sound of iron weapons being forged mingled with the rhythm of soldiers marching and training. Each soldier knew exactly where to sleep, where to eat, and when to train. Collective barracks ensured that the legionaries were always close to one another, strengthening camaraderie and esprit de corps. This collective environment, often cramped and with few luxuries, was the ideal setting to reinforce mutual loyalty and obedience. In addition to the barracks, the fort had sacred sites. The sacrarium, for example, housed the legion standards considered sacred by the soldiers. The worship of the gods, especially the emperor, reinforced the notion that the soldiers were participating in something greater than themselves. The altar dedicated to Jupiter, Mars, or other war gods not only bolstered military spirit, but also served to remind the legionaries that their duties extended beyond the battlefield. The impeccable organization of Roman forts turned the daily lives of their inhabitants into a constant preparation for war. Every detail, from the layout of the barracks to the watchtowers, reflected Rome's commitment to discipline. The fort was, in fact, much more than a defensive stronghold. It was a machine of control, order, and obedience, designed to create soldiers ready to face any challenge that the vast empire might throw at them. The diet of Roman soldiers was designed to provide the energy necessary for long marches, intense combat, and grueling training. The foundation of their diet was wheat, which they transformed into bread or porridge, simple and nutritious foods known as pulse. Although it might seem monotonous by modern standards, this diet was carefully balanced to maximize physical endurance. Soldiers consumed large quantities of grains, which were stored in special depots within the forts, ensuring a constant supply even in times of scarcity. In addition to grains, legionaries also ate meat, typically pork or beef, which could be salted or smoked to extend its shelf life. When the situation allowed, soldiers would also hunt or acquire fresh meat from markets near the camps. Diluted wine was a common beverage, helping to disinfect water and keep soldiers hydrated. Vegetables and legumes, such as lentils and beans, were also part of the menu, providing fiber and other essential nutrients. Everything was prepared simply but efficiently to nourish a legion always ready for combat. Legionaries ate in groups, reinforcing a sense of community and and camaraderie. Each group of 8 soldiers, known as a quintubernium, shared the tasks of food preparation and took care of their own space within the fort. This collective structure not only optimized food distribution, but also created an environment where soldiers could relax and strengthen bonds of trust with each other. Mealtime also served as a break from the rigorous routine of training and hard labor, functioning as a brief mental and physical relief before the strict discipline took control again. Food logistics were one of the most impressive factors of Roman military organization. Each legion carried a vast stockpile of supplies that could feed thousands of men for weeks. When camped in allied or newly conquered regions, acquiring food became easier, but in many cases, the forts were completely self-sufficient. There were ovens for baking bread and large communal kitchens. The abundance of grains and the ability to store them for long periods made the fort storage centers as well protected as the soldiers they housed. This diet, while simple, was crucial for the success of the Roman legions. The constant and nutritious food provided soldiers with the energy and endurance needed to march dozens of kilometers a day, carry heavy equipment, and fight for hours on end. Moreover, the impeccable organization of food supplies allowed the legionaries to maintain their strength for extended periods, even in inhospitable territories or during prolonged sieges. Nutrition was an essential factor that transformed each legionary into a true war machine. The training routine inside Roman forts was relentless. Every legionary, from the most inexperienced recruit to the veteran hardened by years of campaigning, underwent a continuous cycle of physical and mental refinement. Military training involved forced marches, combat simulations, and weapon handling practice, always under the watchful eye of the centurions. The long marches, often exceeding 30 kilometers a day while carrying full armor and supplies, were not just physical preparation, but a test of endurance that forged discipline and obedience. A central part of the training was simulated combat. Soldiers practiced with wooden shields that were heavier than those used in battle and lead swords to build arm strength and endurance. This rigorous physical training ensured that when the moment of actual battle came, the regular combat equipment felt light by comparison. Drills with gladii, spears, and the strategic use of shields were tireless, and each legionary was trained to perform both in formation and individually. Additionally, soldiers learned to quickly construct fortifications and move in difficult terrain, ensuring they were ready for any situation. Beyond brute strength, tactics were a crucial element in the training of the legionaries. They were taught to fight in specific formations, such as the famous testudo or tortoise formation, which provided almost complete protection against enemy projectiles. In cohesive groups, each soldier knew exactly their position and what to do in any combat scenario, making the legions an almost indomitable force on the battlefield. Legionaries not only learned to follow orders, but to anticipate them. It was this precision and synchronization that made the Roman legion so feared and respected throughout the world. To complement the physical and tactical training, there was also a strong psychological component. Roman soldiers were subjected to a constant environment of competitiveness and strict discipline, where failures were rarely tolerated. The punishment for disobedience or failure in training could be severe, ranging from beatings to the infamous decimation, in which 1 in every 10 soldiers was executed in cases of desertion or cowardice in battle. This atmosphere of extreme rigidity forged an unyielding army, willing to fight to the death for Rome. The constant training, harsh punishments, and extreme physical demands were what set Roman soldiers apart from enemy armies. Inside the forts, far from the chaos of the battlefield, legionaries were shaped and refined day after day, ready to march at a moment's notice into combat. It was this incessant cycle of training that allowed the Roman legions to dominate entire nations, moving as an unbeatable unit, commanded by the discipline they learned within the walls of their encampments. Although the environment inside Roman forts was primarily military, interaction with civilians was also part of the legionaries' routine. Around the fortified camps, true civilian communities, known as camaraderie, formed, where soldiers' families, merchants, and other civilians lived and worked. These civil settlements provided services to the soldiers, such as goods, food, clothing, and even entertainment. The constant exchange between soldiers and civilians helped sustain the local economy and offered the legionaries a connection to the world outside of military discipline. During periods when the legions were stationed for long durations, it was common for soldiers to become romantically involved with local women, and many ended up starting families near the forts. Although official marriage was prohibited for soldiers during service, informal unions were frequent and tolerated to some extent. Many legionaries maintained long-lasting relationships, and after retiring, they often settled in these same areas, tying their lives to the fate of the communities surrounding the forts. The soldiers' social life, however, was not limited to interactions with civilians. Inside the forts, legionaries formed strong bonds of camaraderie with one another. Daily interactions, intense training, and shared battles created a network of trust and loyalty. Nights were often filled with games such as dice and small internal competitions, relieving the burden of military routine. The closest soldiers shared confidences and formed groups that transcended the wartime environment, making life in the camp a bit more bearable. On the other hand, the presence of civilians and commerce around the forts served not only for the soldiers' leisure. The economy of these civilian settlements was heavily dependent on the troops. The constant flow of supplies, the trade of goods, and the hiring of services made the forts dynamic economic centers. The interaction between soldiers and civilians was also strategic for Rome, as it helped maintain peace in the conquered regions. The presence of forts and their surrounding communities created a symbiotic relationship between the Roman army and the conquered territories, facilitating imperial control over vast and culturally diverse areas. Life in the forts, while governed by military discipline, was enriched by this complex social network involving both civilians and the legionaries themselves. These interactions meant that soldiers were not just war machines, but also men who, between campaigns, lived, loved, and connected with the communities around them, shaping Roman society both inside and outside the battlefield.